Welcome to this lesson where we're going to look at mass advertising and the consumer society. And just to start things off today, I'm going to give you a few moments to have a look at the adverts in front of you and see if you can work out what they are trying to sell. So what's important to understand about this period is that a whole brand new advertising industry grew up to promote the vast range of consumer goods that became available. And it used increasingly sophisticated techniques. They were often colourful, catchphrases were used. And not only was it in magazines, but it was also found through radios, and that was a brand new way of starting to promote things. So let's have a little look at what allowed a consumer society to develop and what evidence we've got to show its prosperity in the 1920s. So the first piece of evidence is the chart in front of you, and that shows the unemployment figures year on year in the 1920s. And you can see there's a bit of a spike in 1921, but thereafter it remains relatively low. And I don't know if you can cast your mind back to the government announcement in 1926, where it said the standard of living in America was the highest it had ever been in the country's history. And just some evidence to support that, have a little look at source 3. In 1914 there were 7,000 millionaires. By 1928 that had grown fivefold to 35,000 millionaires. Some more evidence is the rise in average earnings. Between 1921 and 1929, it rose from $1,308 to $1,716. So people were earning far more by the late 1920s and therefore could spend more. The final thing, which again is a really good piece of evidence, is the national income per head. So you can see as a total the national income, but you can also see again how much the country is earning per person based on the figures there. So let's have a look at some specific evidence, and one way in which the consumer society prospered was through chain stores. And in the 1920s they rose from 312 in total to 1,395. And in particular, clothing was produced on a mass scale. Manufacturers recognised that you could produce lots of the same size dresses that would meet the needs of a high proportion of the population. So the clothing industry, or the sales in the clothing industry, went up by 427% in the 1920s. Now, what also allowed the sort of the work between these chain stores and the factories was the transport infrastructure. And again, it was mentioned on a previous lesson, but just to remind you that not only did we see an increasing number of cars, but trucks tripled to 3.5 million by 1929. And it's quite often what you see as a sort of image of America today, the American truck driving, and their train infrastructure is not as strong. And the second thing to mention, obviously, is roads. And by 1930, the miles of paved road in America had doubled from the early 1920s. So the transport infrastructure really helped to allow this consumer society to develop. The final thing to mention is that the mail order companies, even if you couldn't go to a chain store, wherever you lived in America, even in the remote parts, you could buy anything. And the number of mail order companies grew enormously. The most famous of these was Sears, Roebuck and Co. of Chicago. And in 1928, nearly 1/3 of Americans bought goods from this company. 1/3 of Americans, giving it sales worth $347 million in that particular year. So I'll just give you a chance to look at a few more adverts, see if you can work out what they're trying to sell. So hopefully, again, you're sort of recognising that it's fairly straightforward to work out, and that was part of the marketing campaign to entice people to buy them. It was straightforward advertising. So here's just a few tables. I think these are quite good to go through just to look at the sort of sheer volume of goods that were being purchased at the time. Not just things like the clothing industry, but looking beyond it, lavatories, vacuum cleaners, washing machines, huge increases. And here's another table just to give you an indication of the scale of production that was taking place. Radios really stands out for me as one that really grew so large, from 60,000 to 10 million by 1929. And what you had in America at the time was this ongoing cycle of prosperity. The word prosperity was the buzzword in the 1920s. You had increased production and therefore more workers, higher wages. They're coming out and going to spend more, which obviously led to more sales and therefore increased production again. And with increased production comes technological advances. Companies were trying to find ways of improving their production lines. So we'll just quickly revisit then at the end the earlier adverts. I don't know if you've had a chance to sort of think about these a bit more, but just to go through them in turn. So hopefully Sears, Roebuck & Co. of Chicago is a catalogue, a mail order company. The one beneath that is for stockings. The one in the middle is for tights. And on the right you have the Chevrolet, the car. And again, hopefully some of those images resonate with modern day advertising as well.